Hi everyone, I'll introduce myself. I'll introduce my two colleagues. I'm Olivia Catus. I'm one of PA's Cabinet Office experts.
I'm Steve Rayford-Hind. I lead a lot of PA's large public sector transformation projects, focusing primarily on Cabinet Office and regulation.
And I'm Paul McPherson. I'm the public sector lead for Microsoft Business Applications, working with government and wider public sector to drive change and transformation enabled by technology.
Fantastic, thank you. So the purpose of today is to talk about three key things. The first is AI and how we can leverage it across government. The second is to talk about what Agile policy making means to us and how the government can leverage that. And finally, we'll be talking about the Cabinet Office Digital's 6 key strategy areas and what the government needs to do over the coming 5 years to make sure it's delivering against those to deliver fantastic public services. So to start off, I'm going to ask both of you just to share a little bit of your experience over the last few years working with government digital, what you think the key things the government does really well are, and where we think the areas for change and transformation are over the coming years. So I don't know, Steve, do you want to kick us off? And then Paul, just a couple of minutes.
Okay, thanks. Well, I think one of the key areas, certainly for government service transformation, is putting users absolutely at the heart of everything they do, understanding user needs, user pain points, and providing a laser focus on particularly accessibility and other ways that users of public services can fulfill their needs. That's absolute priority. And I think there are some technologies coming through, like One Login for Government and others, which are going to transform people's access to public services with very much with that removing pain points in mind.
Paul, same question to you. What do you think the government's doing brilliantly and what do you think that needs to be done to accelerate the areas for development?
I think what really brings the two things together is the citizen experience, but behind that is citizens' expectations. So expectations are moving very, very quickly, enabled by technology, enabled by experience that they have dealing with commercial organisations, many of which we shop with, and those types of things. And all of that was accelerated through the use of digital media channels through the pandemic. So that ability to be proactive, react quickly, give an experience for people to consume government services that's the same and accessible as what they'd receive in other elements of their life, I think is really, really important. And that's the real opportunity to accelerate those things. But I think what's really, really important behind that is that if we're improving the availability and accessibility of government services through, let's just refer to it as a digital front door and better experience, then the technology that lies behind that, which may rely on siloed data sources, legacy systems, manual processes, repetitive processes, then there's a real opportunity to improve all of that, to modernize all of that, to become more data and insight driven, which will further improve the experience that can actually be offered out to citizens.
So we're moving into our second area of focus, which is around Agile and Agile policy making as well as Agile delivery. So I think Agile delivery, it might be worth just touching on what Agile delivery means to you. And again, Steve, we can start with you, and Paul, please jump in. And then we can talk about what Agile policy making means.
Well, I'm a bit long in the tooth, so old enough to remember before Post-it notes existed, I think, when everything was driven by kind of documents and waiting ages to get a response on a decision or an area of policy. And I think now the ability to kind of think in a much more kind of focused and agile way and deliver policy and outcomes in phased approach using agile methodology, taking those best practices from industry and software development and bringing it to things like physical policy making is quite a radical departure, and we're seeing quite a bit of pull from organisations like regulators who are looking to bring Agile into their processes to try and accelerate and improve the quality of outcomes, and partly because regulators are increasingly struggling to keep pace with change. I mean, I think it's well known that they've always struggled a wee bit, but with advent of, well, not advent of, but the growing impact of AI and other things are proving very challenging for regulators. So the more they can apply some of that agile method and approach to their policy development particularly is really helping, I think.
I think taking the themes, the agile themes of being very outcome focused, and then taking sort of the quickest path to those outcomes is things that we can distill and apply to policy making. In technology, and people have probably heard this phrase, we quite often talk about a minimum viable product of, how can we get the technology working in situ to meet a requirement or an outcome very, very quickly, and then build and iterate that to make it more wholesome, to do more, to go down to a lower level of detail, etc. And I guess my challenge would maybe be, well, could we even take that acronym, and should we be thinking about minimum viable policy of, what is, the policy that will achieve the outcome, and then, okay, there's always going to be only a certain degree of flexibility and iteration of government policy and how quickly that can be ratified and adopted, but should we be looking more for that minimum viable type of approach? And again, just trying to be more agile, more quick to deliver, but it may be that we actually start off smaller rather than having to kind of first ball the ocean, and then actually some of those policy requirements may have already changed by the time it actually comes to be.
And what do you think the roles, we've talked about some agile ceremonies there and how that can apply to policy, and what do you think the role of the user is in agile policy making?
Well, from recent experience, I think when we started out, the policy teams were of a mindset, okay, we'll create policy, we'll create regulations. If people don't comply, we'll prosecute them, and therefore we achieve our aims. Whereas bringing the user much more into the process of policy development has made the thinking kind of more inclusive of citizen and user needs. And thereby we've kind of created this entity whereby it's easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing, and thereby you achieve your regulatory aims, and that seems to be a much more frictionless process. So, and we had, as I mentioned, we had some quite sceptical policy teams that we had them working in workshop and agile and stand-ups and target customer experience mapping and other methods that they were unfamiliar with. And when they began to understand how much it could help them integrate user needs into the policy making, they were astounded, I think, and you could almost hear the pennies dropping around the room when they go, this is amazing, why weren't we doing this before? So I think it's a trend that's going to catch on, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I think with change and transformation of any form in any type of organisation, either public or private, then these things need to be led, from the chief executive and the executive team down, and they need to be communicated, reinforced, and that is an ongoing journey, and it needs that kind of support, investment of time and fiscally to make these things happen. And I think to make them repetitive and a way of working rather than something that was done as a one-off project and doing it differently. So an example of a regulator that I work with very closely, they changed their whole vision and their mission of what they wanted to be and how they wanted to inspect and regulate. And that was to become a far more proactive, innovative, insight sharing, best practice, guidance type organisation, whilst obviously still fulfilling all of their regulatory and inspection and prosecution type requirements. But it was to move away from being that stereotypical, cyclical, calendar-based kind of inspection body to be that more of a, as I say, proactive industry advisor type stance, which enabled them to be far more proactive in getting ahead of the curve and dealing with things that are coming down the line. Because one thing regulators do is we all know and have touched on is they have to deal in the here and now, but they have to deal with the shocks, the changes, the effects in industry, in global economics that we're not even aware of yet, and we may be aware of in the very, very near future. So, back to that word agility, being able to also deal with the here and now as well as what could come around the corner, has been proved for many different reasons in recent years, I think is really important in there.
I think what we've seen is that using agile approaches, you can go from policy to code in a really, relatively fast pace. So something like 9 months, we went from, royal assent to live services that are delivering legislation, and taken the policy teams and the whole organisation, with us on that journey. For example, show and tells where policy teams can see the stuff evolving almost in real time. They can be immersed in the front end services and the kind of back end and operations that are supporting it, and the whole of that organisation appears to have been upskilled in this process on the journey, and that we've left them with a kind of legacy of new capability about how to deliver policy in a kind of faster and more user-centred way.
So there's a couple of things coming out of here around what the UK civil service needs to do to enhance its capabilities in order to effectively deliver agile delivery, but also do agile policy making. So one of the things you touched on, Paul, was around the overall architecture and infrastructure and the kind of drumbeat of how civil service departments work. So perhaps we could elaborate on that, and then we can talk about the capability and the skills. That was the second thing that was coming through there. So do we want to talk about the kind of overall architecture and the way that civil service departments function and what we think they need to do to better deliver agile policy making?
So I think for me it's the importance of underpinning all the key tenets of the strategy and sort of the manual of how to do these things with data and insight, where we still have a huge opportunity. So to be more informed, to be better evidence-based, to be more agile, and to enable enable service design and the benefits to be realised, then from a technical perspective, it always comes down to data and insights. So that being able to consume, ingest, and collect data very quickly from lots of diverse sources, structured and unstructured, and being able to, at speed and with agility, understand, gain insight to enable the actual delivery of these services is an area where we still have a huge opportunity. And obviously the advent of AI, or artificial intelligence, and large language models, will only see that further increase in speed, agility, and be able to take that data, understand it, and help then realise the actual services and the processes that have been designed in the very citizen and human-centric ways that Steve describes. I think is the real opportunity to underpin that architecture, but then to actually enable it to deliver, and as we've already discussed, deliver at pace with agility and with an element of proactiveness that we've not yet seen in government.
We recently did some work with a group of regulators to look at, AI across their operating model, where it can kind of support and improve, the business of regulation, everything from, kind of fast analysis of transparency reporting, kind of looking at patterns in data that indicate fraud or, opportunity and other things. And I think that we're at the beginning of what everyone says it about every 2 years, we're beginning of a new revolution, but I think we really are seeing, the green shoots of something quite remarkable at the moment. And, for the benefit to citizens, to business, to, health, and, all the other things that we need to make up a great nation are a fantastic opportunity for, organisations like PA and I guess for Microsoft too, and you're certainly facilitating a lot of that kind of development that we're seeing.
So to conclude then on an exciting question, what do we think some of the new tech and tools that we'll be using across government are in 5 to 10 years? And that might be majoring on your point around tools which are actually innovating as they go and innovating the data as they go to make sure that it's as clean as possible, or actually user-facing services that customers are using.
So I think we will continue to see the elaboration and extension of digital channels I'm sure there'll be new ones or new applications within that, or things that begin with consumer and become consumer grade. You know, the fact that it's not that many years ago that you wouldn't have thought you'd be interacting with government or a commercial organisation through WhatsApp, for instance. So the development of digital channels will certainly continue. And as we've already discussed, then the opportunity in government to continually meet citizens' expectations, but also to continually deliver efficiency and productivity, then technology will continue to move in that way. And then we've already obviously talked about AI, which will continue to develop. It will develop at pace. So within that, there will be the opportunity for people to make ever better informed, evidence-based decisions supported through the use of AI, and whether that be in everyday interactions or whether that be in large-scale research projects, or, you know, AI is already used considerably in health around screening and interpretation of scans, etc. Then, you know, we'll continue to see sort of life made better and human supported through artificial intelligence, and just assisting us in those things that we do. And that's sort of, as people may have seen with a lot of the publicity lately, you know, that's why, you know, a lot of our AI capability comes through as co-pilots. So it is literally that. It's a co-pilot to help you do things, whether that be case management in an inspection in a regulator, whether that potentially be a use for research and being able to summarize huge amounts of documentation very, very quickly from structured and unstructured sources to help advance policy and decision making. Then, you know, the opportunities, you know, are innumerable over the next 5 years.
It's an exciting time. What about you, Steve?
There's a couple of things. One for me that we really mustn't forget, which is there are a lot of people that are digitally disenfranchised and don't have access to services that can improve outcomes and kind of life circumstances for them. And I think we should really focus on working to make sure that no one is left behind, and that's definitely the core of, you know, kind of government thinking. I think for me the other one is about resilience. And now, you know, we're heading into challenging times with climate change and other things, that technology that can improve perhaps the kind of future circumstances for the next generation and the legacy that we'll leave behind. So, I mean, there's a final one for me, which I think, you know, that technology is becoming increasingly complex, and that maybe that's back to the first point about people being left behind, that improving the simplicity of some of the access and services and kind of platforms, so that, you know, as you said, the sort of minimum viable service is available to everyone, and the sophistication is there if you want it, but it doesn't need to be complicated by having all the other things you might, you know, have access to.
So we started this talking a little bit about what some of the key things government needed to do to accelerate that digital growth over the next 5 years. And I think we've concluded that, you know, along with all the other exciting things that need to happen, it's people who are at the heart of it, accessibility and also training and upskilling.